Hello and welcome to Kapow, Woosh, Zap, Electrifying Learning through Comics in the High School Classroom. We are excited to be here to share some of our experiences and passions about using comics with students as part of the 2021 Educator Series for ComicCon. Welcome, and hopefully you are here and excited to learn and excited to create learning for our students. You can access the slides at this short link. So you can just type in bit.ly/cced2021, and capitalization is important. So that's capital CCE, lowercase d, 2021. And so let's go ahead and get started. First of all, of course, our font is a little bit funky here. Let's go ahead and jump in and let each of our panelists introduce themselves, starting out with Mick Rabin. Go ahead, Mick.
Hi, people. My name is Mick Rabin, and I'm a resource teacher in the Youth Advocacy Department, and my pronouns are he and him, and I'm a longtime comics geek, so it's a pleasure to be here today. Thank you so much for including me.
Hi, I'm Rogosin. I teach history at Olympian High School, and I am also a longtime comic nerd.
Hey, Joanna, Sargent here, and I'm a librarian in the group. Even though I'm in elementary, I have taught at the high school level, but happy to be here. Love this group and love to talk about graphic novels.
And hello, my name is Scott Nielsen. I'm a special education teacher at Santana High School in the Grossmont Union High School District. And I am a longtime fan of comics as well. I started collecting comics when I was about 11 or 12, about the same time that I went to my first ComicCon, back in 1980 something. Anyway, happy to be here.
And I'm Jewel Alderson-Clark. I am the Integrated Curriculum Coordinator at the San Diego County Office of Education. And we are so excited to have everyone together. My background, I did not pick up comics for a long time, but I have always been a fantasy reader. And so ComicCon, as we know, embraces so many different media. And so it's been really exciting to jump into the world of comics with the fellow teachers here. And so as we jump in, I know we are teachers at our core, so we have some slides to lead us along today. And let's go ahead and jump in first. And I want to kind of ask our panelists here this big question. What is the potential superpower of comics in the high school classroom? Anyone want to jump in on that first?
I'll jump in. Okay. I think that accessibility, of course, is going to be kind of like the #1 thing that graphic novels and comics can kind of give to those kids. And, you know, the fact that it's not as intimidating to a struggling reader or an English language learner or a kid who just doesn't like to read. And it's also really exciting for kids who like comics to be, handed a graphic novel, that it creates that really positive experience in the classroom. And I think it's so wonderful to have all of those illustrations, because comic books can really, they have that flexibility to convey mood, to convey emotion with not just text, but also visual elements. And, especially for younger readers, sometimes illustrations are so much more effective at bringing the emotion of things home. So I think that would be mine.
Thank you.
Yeah, I want to say, as a librarian, graphic novels and comics are probably going to be one of our best sellers. They're going to be have the highest circulation typically in a lot of libraries. So it's great if teachers are going to use them in the classroom as well, because if we have them in the library, they're going to be they're great for kids who are reluctant readers. For those who wouldn't want to read a novel, they'll pick up a graphic novel. So it's more, as we've said, they're more accessible for teens.
All right, Scott or Mick, do you want to chime in on this one?
I can say something. I think that the superhero or the superpower of comics in the classroom for me, I think that it helps to having the visual element and it is so important to people who are English language learners, as well as people who with processing deficits and other issues that keep them from reading, you know, actual novels or big blocks of text, you know, because they either don't have the vocabulary for it, don't understand it, or because it's just, you know, too much to take in at once, you know. Having that in the classroom as it's so helpful for so many students. Also, it's a wonderful tool for engaging with students. You know, what I found is that, you know, over the years with, you know, especially with all of the movies in the MCU coming out, that's been one of the things that the common interest that I've shared with students. So we got to, I would find, you know, people who were really into, you know, certain comics, you know, and we'd strike up conversations about it. We'd, you know, watch trailers in class sometimes, if that's okay. But yeah, they're really great in that sense, and as well as a learning tool, a social tool, and for, like Dizzy was saying, you know, with English learners and people with processing deficits.
So I was going to add, I think everybody said really articulated what I was going to say. That the one thing I was going to add is that there actually is a fairly long history of comics being used for educational purposes, and going back into the 1920s and 30s even. It's only been more recently, though, in the past 10 to 20 years, that comics have been widely embraced by a stronger educational community, just like not so much as like degenerate literature or something that's less than novels, but rather put on par with what most people consider more like traditional literature. So I think a lot of the power behind it is finally being realized by a lot of educators. And as I visit with teachers and librarians and counselors in the various parts of San Diego Unified, I can tell you that there's a lot more comics being adopted into use, facilitating different kinds of educational conversations than even 5 years ago. So it's really exciting to see this happening. And the Instructional Media Center, which is kind of like our central library for educators, also embraces lots of different kinds of graphic novels. So yeah, there's plenty of potential, and it's finally being, I think, utilized in a way that's really positive.
Yeah, I'm really excited. And one of the things that we put together was a little bookmark. And along throughout the bookmark, it talks about which of the standards it connects to when we talk about students engaging in reading and writing. And so, you know, not everyone has really realized how much it takes to grapple with a text in a comic, and you're reading between the lines, and you know, in very small amounts of dialogue there, it says so much. And so I have to agree with everyone else along the way, and I don't have to chime in the whole time as the facilitator, but on this one, definitely connecting student passion to the standards is literally the golden component of education, and this is one great way to do that. So we're going to start out with Dizzy giving a little bit of an intro to each person is going to have a little highlight moment. And so if you want to jump in and talk about how you use comics in your classroom, Dizzy.
Absolutely. So as I said, I teach history at Olympian High School. I teach ancient and modern world history. So I kind of run the gamut of human history. And I use comic books and graphic novels and to help students understand that history. I'm really lucky out of us that, you know, history is by definition a narrative. And so I approach my job and the content by trying to make that narrative flow rather than, you know, I think a lot of our experience in history class in high school, which was memorize the list of names, the list of dates, the list of battles. And so comics and graphic novels for me have been incredibly helpful in helping me transition into that more narrative and I think more interesting teaching than straight out of the textbook. For ancient world history, I have a lot of limited options. You know, so far there aren't a lot of materials. There are no graphic novel adaptations yet of, you know, the Epic of Gilgamesh or even Clan of the Cave Bear. So I am excited though. They've just released a graphic novel adaptation of Yuval Harari's Sapiens, which I'm now hoping to win the lottery and get a class set of one of these days. So fingers crossed, guys. But so until that happens, for me, I use most of my comics and graphic novels for modern world history. And so that's going to be the focus of what I'm going to talk about later when I talk about the actual resources. And I have a list of books and names that I'm going to suggest, because I think we're all teachers, we're kind of like, okay, I get the pedagogy, I understand why we're doing it. Do you have a list of what I can use? And so I definitely want to go for the more useful route into that later. So I won't give my sales pitch here. Yeah, so that's kind of my overview.
I was on mute. Perfect. Thank you very much, Dizzy. And we will kind of head forward. So you might be wondering, who are these people and why are they on this panel? Well, we are a group of like-minded individuals who meet every month to talk about comics. And so ComicCon does have a selection of book clubs. They are one of the things they do to impact the San Diego community. And so although we're virtual right now because of the pandemic, we normally will meet together on a regular basis every month. And what we do is we read through books that are facilitated by someone in the group and focused on either how we might use them in the classroom or how we might engage students who might be interested in that book. And so we're going to take a moment to share some of our favorites from the books that we've read. And so, Dizzy is first up again, so we'll go ahead and give her the floor.
Okay, so I really like George Takei's, and I always worry that I'm pronouncing that incorrectly. They Called Us Enemy. It's about the Japanese internment camps here in the United States. And so it's incredibly applicable both to the standards of modern world history, US history, and very topical for, 2021. And the students like it. A lot of them actually recognize the name. Some of them even follow him on Twitter. And it just, again, what I was saying before about conveying emotion, and sometimes it's just so much easier to see that in an illustration than perhaps reading it in Farewell to Manzanar. And I know that Mick had said to me privately before we started that he's going to post some resources to use. They Called Us Enemy. So look forward to that.
Perfect. All right, Scott.
Hello. So yeah, I'm a very new member of the group. So I've only been around for a few books now, a few of our monthly meetings. But one of the recent books that we read actually was something that I probably would not have picked up, but only read because of this group. And I found it to be a very great book, especially considering some of the things we've been talking about, comics in the classroom, the benefits for English learners and things like that. And this book, Almost American Girl by Rabin is a memoir of a girl who was relocated with her mom in the, I think, 80s or late 80s, early 90s, somewhere around there, to Alabama, from Korea to Alabama. And her experiences are kind of unfold throughout the book. And it's really awesome. And I don't know if this is going to work or not, but again, I can't even see myself, but if you can see this, there's some signs here, there's some frames here of her in the classroom when she got to Alabama, and the teachers talking to her or the class, and it's just a number of like looks like chicken scratch or scribbles, something like that. There's no words there, but it's showing that that's what she's hearing. She doesn't understand any of the things that that the teacher is saying, but and she's in second period social studies, third period French, fourth period science, and by science she's drooling and falling asleep. But just that experience, I think that the fact that it's detailed in this graphic novel is so beneficial, especially to some of our English learners and students from other countries. There's a number at the school I teach at. There's a number of students from all over the place. Iraq, let's see, now Syria, different places in Mexico. We've got, I think, at least one person from an Asian country, Vietnam. I know that, and that's all that I can think of right now. But I know that there are quite a few students on campus. We have a very big EL program, and I actually suggested this to our EL coordinators on campus after we read it with the group. But anyway, I also really liked Redbone recently, but enough for me now.
Perfect. Thank you. I think that's one of the things we didn't even talk about, but we talk about so much in book club is the diversity, the just tackling of things that are a little bit of a hidden history here in the US too, along the way. So I've learned so much in book club so far. All right, Joanna, you want to talk a little bit about Hey Kiddo?
Sure. One of the neat things I think that we have found through this group is we found a lot of books that speak to issues that maybe some of our students are dealing with, or we're bound to have students that are dealing with these issues no matter at what level. And Hey Kiddo is one of those about a young man struggling with parents' addiction and lives with grandparents. And Jarrett Krozoska, which I'm not sure if I said his name right. By the way, Teaching Books has a great way to pronounce all of these authors' names that I need to show you guys sometime. But anyways, he is a very popular, most of his graphic novels and books are in my elementary library. But this Hey Kiddo is just such a fantastic, just an example of someone who's struggling and going beyond that and finding his talent in art that kind of got him beyond his family situation. And so this one was a really great one that we felt could speak to a lot of students, and especially just, the way that he was able to, I mean, now he's a published author, creator, graphic novelist, and has published many books. And then this one won the National Book Award. It was a finalist. So just rising above circumstances, which so many of our students need to see that success in spite of whatever your family situation or your circumstances are. And so that was what I really loved about this one.
Thank you. There are a few people who know more about the book March than Mick here. So Mick, do you want to talk a little bit about why this is your favorite?
Yeah, well, thanks for the kudos. It's partly just because I'm such a geek for it. To me, like, if you take social justice and comics and you mix them together, it's like a Reese's peanut butter cup. It's like the meeting of two great things. You put them together, and social justice is so well encapsulated and articulated by John Lewis. It's really it's like the blueprint for civil rights and being able to self-advocate and advocate for others. He really has taken his life story and some of the major events that he was involved with and made them into something that students and youth can consume. I read it with my third graders when I was in the classroom, and I know that it's for sure on required college reading lists. So it's really just, it's going to depend on, how qualitative the conversation is, how much you can provide as an educator for your classroom, some opportunities to cross-reference and do some front loading so that your students are able to understand the events that are happening in the book. I had multiple opportunities to meet with Congressman Lewis, and there were some just amazing things that sort of were revealed over that time. I'm going to kind of cut to the chase, and I just want to show people something. So if Jewel, you can pass me the screen share.
Yes, I
Okay.
didn't.
All right,
I
then.
thought you might be talking about it later, but we will send that your way now.
Okay. If you need me to talk about it later, I can.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay. Okay. So for this, as far as the, let me make sure I got this all set up here. So the thing that I've created for They Called Us Enemy, sorry, for March Archives is a series, and this is actually part of a larger series that I'm going to dub the Necessary Trouble series, which is kind of named after something that John Lewis coined. Necessary Trouble in the sense that it's kind of a reference to when people need to speak up and stand up for something that's right. So really kind of getting kids fired up about social justice issues is a really significant way of getting students feeling engaged with the text and having a sense of agency. So to me, like, this book represents just so much potential for getting students really fired up about things. I've created this March Archives, and I want to just go over the main point of this, and that is for educators to be able to read the book with their class, to be able to watch a video, and there's a video here on the website, and once you've watched the video, you can actually interact with Congressman John Lewis, even though he's no longer alive. We made some effort to record him. And what I'll do is I'll share that a little bit when we get into we dig into the weeds just a little bit later regarding the individual slides. So let me just pass it on back, and I will stop share and we'll come back.
Perfect. All right. Well, I think that cues up. Let's see, where are we at in our order here? Scott is up next. Scott, are you ready to talk a little bit about your work?
Yeah. So I was very fortunate to walk into an English classroom, a junior English classroom at the beginning of, it was beginning of last year. And it was a new teacher on campus, and I found her room was lined with bookshelves. And one of the things I noticed early on was that there was also like Funko Pops and different things. And here this teacher comes to introduce herself and say that how big of a fan of ComicCon she was. And not only that, how big of a fan of graphic novels she was. So which was kind of uncommon. There's hasn't been a lot of English teachers that I've experienced, at least in my teaching, where they are really pushing graphic novels to the class. Some teachers make them available. Some teachers do them, will accept them as reading material for different assignments and activities. But this teacher was like going out of her way by presenting different, she would present different books each week, and she would give a little overview and try to get people in her class excited about different books and excited about reading. The class began with sustained silent reading every morning, and students were supposed to pick a book and read during that time. There were quite a few students in this class that were both English learners and students who were on IEPs for different types of disabilities, relating to processing or attention and all kinds of different things. When I saw this, I saw a number of students, go walk over to these book cases and start looking through them, and quite a few of them picked up graphic novels, and I was really excited to see some of these students who I had never seen sit down reading the same book over and over and over again throughout a series of weeks or even months. So there was one student in particular that I remember, he picked up a copy of Mouse. And this was a student who I was supporting in this English class, as well as in a US history class. And so the English departments and social science departments at our school, they try to work together, especially for the 11th grade curriculum, where they're trying to work with the English department to help students to learn how to really kind of fine tune their writing skills, especially in relating to research writing. And then in social science, they're working to help students with the research part of it and choosing different kind of historical topics to write about. So there's some cohesion there. So when this student picked up this copy of Mouse and got very engrossed in the story, and he kept reading it over and over again, it also kind of carried over into the US history, where he was actually starting to think about, you know, the things that he would be writing about, the things that he was thinking about, the different topics we've been covering, and one of them was World War II. Imagine that. And it was just a really cool to see how this graphic novel played a role in his, you know, becoming engaged in that period in history, in the story that's not just the story that was unfolding in the book, but also but then that interest carried over into U.S. history and to the work that he was doing there. That was one of the things that I noticed quite a bit. You know, just students, you know, really kind of starting to develop an interest in reading and kind of following the stories and wanting to know more and wanting to keep reading the books until they're done. So I see a lot of students, you know, pick up books, you know, read a couple of pages or read a paragraph and then put it back. Or there's some students who read a different book every day. You know, they come in and, okay, I'll just go pull a book off the shelf, find something, and then but those times when I've seen, you know, students kind of really get engaged in the act of reading through graphic novels and having and affecting their overall learning across classes. It's just been a pretty awesome thing to experience and watch. So I don't have any slides really, but I wanted to talk about that because that's another area of interest in using graphic novels in the classroom, is that you know, like English learners and people with issues associated with processing text, and some students are, you know, I was a struggling reader when I was a kid. You know, that was one of the things that I latched on to comic books for, was because it was difficult for me to kind of sustain my attention through, you know, a block of text. So comic books, you know, helped me to, you know, get a story, you know, that was engaging through other means, you know, to tell stories, like the visual and the written text. So but that's another story about my issues in school. But that's one of the reasons I think that I became a special education teacher, was to try to impact, you know, the learning of students in the classroom, you know, to try to, you know, help them, because I see a lot of students who are very much like me, very much like I was in high school, and the things that I struggled with. So trying to help them to kind of overcome those things and learn new ways to you know, be a student and to keep learning is one of my big interests. So that's hopefully enough for me.
I love that. And I think it's not only the students who are designated in those categories that need help in processing and learning. Our next prompt is about how comics can impact student learning. And I'll say I got a hold of a whole series of Shakespeare manga. And I don't know if you've ever tried to read, you know, Shakespeare. Some people can really understand what's happening, but in order to put it into a picture for students to really connect the words to the text to what's happening, it's such an amazing experience to go through the entire piece with manga. And you're going from back to front in the traditional way that manga reads. So I think that's a great example of one place you could use this. I wonder if anyone else on the panel wants to talk to this particular question.
The pauses, the awkward silences.
Oh, so no, it's just extra wait time because of Zoom.
So for me, again, I'm social science, and I have my list going, and of course the top is mouse, the one that everyone knows, and then They Called Us Enemy is another one that's just come out that's popular. That, The Unfaithful Spy is another great one about World War II. But what's been so interesting is like what Jewel was saying about they're making comics of everything now. I have a graphic novel adaptation of Beowulf, and I don't like Beowulf. And I think that, probably the credential department is coming around to take away my English credential for me saying that, but I hate Beowulf. And Gatsby. I hate Gatsby too. But so, just seeing that in a graphic novel is so much more accessible. And, it's so interesting that Scott was saying how he didn't like to read, so comics were kind of his jam. I remember having to hide my comics because you weren't supposed to read comics. You should read novels, which I loved. I loved reading. I still do. But, so I really display them in my classroom because I fly my nerd flag way high, and, the kids know this. And so it's all about really showing that acceptability of reading those comics as well. But so those are some of the main ones that I've been using in my classroom. But yeah, everything has a graphic novel adaptation now. So if you are a teacher looking for a book to teach, there's probably a graphic novel of it.
Absolutely. I actually here on my bookshelf have organized most of the books that we've read as a book club. And that's like my little secret, like, way I want people to go like, oh, what's on her bookshelf? Like, oh, graphic novels, like, and really be thoughtful about, accepting those as a medium for learning. So when I was in the classroom, I was a chemistry teacher, and I actually did have a book that was like comic book chemistry, and someone had gone through and drawn out, what's an ion, and, all these little things. And so sometimes I'd use excerpts of that with my students in certain, because it's the theory of chemistry, you can't see any of it. You can't see what's happening. It's all on a molecular level. Best microscopes we have might be able to capture like a hint of what's going on, but so much of it is better drawn. And so I remember using that just to help, again, make it accessible and also give it a little bit more whimsy. I don't know if all of you have had whimsical chemistry teachers, but many people have not. So I like to give it a little flavor that way.
I'd like to give a little shout out to science. In terms of physical science, it's worth mentioning that one of the most ubiquitous science inventions of our time is named after a comic book person. His name is Rube Goldberg, and Rube Goldberg is basically in the dictionary for any kind of a contraption that's designed to make a simple task into the most complicated and horrible thing that you can imagine. And so if you look up Rube Goldberg, there's an entire genre of physical science creations that are based in sort of the mechanical world. If you look up Rube Goldberg on YouTube, there are innumerable videos of people that have created physical Rube Goldberg inventions that are just mind-boggling. If you're really interested, check out Honda Rube Goldberg, and it'll just blow your mind. But I'm going to point out just one example, and Jewel, if you're able to pin me, they might be able to see it a little bit better. But this is an example here of Rube Goldberg, and he's got this one invention, and it's cause and effect. It starts at letter A right over here, and it comes down to letter B, and it just one thing leads to the next in the physical world. So in my own classroom, I used to have my kids make Rube Goldberg inventions that were based on the designs that they created in class. So at least in that sense, physical science definitely has a relationship to comics that goes back into the 1920s from Rube Goldberg when he was creating them for comic strips.
I did not realize he had a comic book background. I mean, Rube Goldberg is literally in the California Science Standards, and it's a play on potential and kinetic energy and how they intertwine in making things like that happen. So that's a very cool connection there. Thanks, Mick. All right. Joanna, if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about your connections with comics, that would be great.
All right, thanks, Joel. Well, as I mentioned before, graphic novels are, they're our bestsellers in the library, and as one of the things librarians, I think, in the library world, we're really pushing comics and graphic novels, and it's great to be with this group of educators that are using them in the classrooms, but I don't always see that in my school. So that's something that I've been working on is, just getting teachers to see that, yes, this is real literature. And as we are working to make sure that we are working on universal design learning and all these new things where we're trying to make sure that we are modifying for students, graphic novels are such a great way to do that, because they appeal to students in a way that just a plain print textbook may not. And so, Joel, can you go to my slide? I think it's right after that. I came up with a couple things as a librarian that I think are just a couple tools that I think you can use with graphic novels in the classroom. So we did this one exercise where we used Jamboard, Google Jamboard, for like an icebreaker warm up. And so we just had a comic panel without the words, and we all filled them in on Jamboard. And that was kind of a fun activity, which I think could work at any grade level. This was an elementary comic, but perhaps, you would want to use a different one for high school. And then a tool that I love to use is Wakelet, is a great curation tool. And so another way you could use comics and graphic novels is to tie them to just a novel, or, if you're doing an author study. Jennifer Holm is kind of more middle grade, but some of her things can translate into high school, but she has graphic novels and novels. So, she's kind of one of those that kind of crosses over into both. So, you can use Wakelet as a great, easy curation. All you do is add links, and you can add images to show. So it's a great way if you wanted to tie a graphic novel to something else or to a topic. Like if you're doing a science fiction graphic novel, you could tie it to science and science standards, and you could have a Wakelet for your students. And then teaching books is the other tool that I love. And California has this free as part of our state library databases, and many states do have this as available to them. They also have some free trials available if you're in a state that doesn't have this, but it's a worthwhile investment to consider for a database. They connect lesson plans, and this is the one I was mentioning earlier that will pronounce the author creator's name when we have difficulty pronouncing. So, and usually it has an audio recording of the author saying it. So this is a great tool if you want to really be good about pronouncing names. So I have a picture here of Hey Kiddo. And then there's resources, author interviews, activities, lessons. So, you could tie those in with your graphic novels. If you're looking for an easy discussion questions, usually they'll have those linked in teaching books. So these were just 3 tools I thought that would be useful for teachers and librarians for using graphic novels in the classroom.
That is perfect. Thank you for sharing. And again, we'll put the link at the end of the presentation so you all can access this presentation. You can click things, steal ideas. It's not stealing, it's impersonating, or it's like teacher cosplay. You just want to dress up in some and try on a few of the things that we've tried on in our classes. So that's a great transition too. I don't think we even planned these transitions with such great lead-ins, but the bigger next question, how do you create learning resources for comics you want to teach? And I know Dizzy had some great pieces that she shared with us here. Do you want to talk a little bit about some of these?
Yeah, I know we're starting to run out of time and we haven't talked to Mick yet, so I can be really fast. So for me, with my classes, as I said before, there's not a lot of source material for ancient world history. And so instead of finding lessons to use the comics, we create our own comics a lot. So like Cave Painting Day is a lot of fun, a lot of, handprints and mammoth hunts and the occasional anachronistic Pokemon. We illustrate Egyptian and Mayan creation myths. We've illustrated our comic versions of Siddhartha when we read it. But I know that a lot of students are really intimidated by creating their own drawings. It is a running joke in my family that I cannot draw. My stick figures look like Mummy and Daddy's stick figure. We're a little too closely related. I am the worst drawer. And I know that there are some students who would be really intimidated by that. So I have a few different sites posted there about just creating your own comic strip, like dragging, and everything is already generated and you just have to cut and paste. I also included some lesson plans, some very, very basic graphic novel analytical assignments, just to kind of give a first stepping stone to the newbie graphic novel user. Obviously, cut, paste, edit, use. Any teacher who went through the credential program probably remembers Harry Wong, steal, steal, steal. There's no need to reinvent the wheel. So they're templates for looking at novels and comics, not as just illustration, but as part of the narrative, that the art means something, the shading means something, the font used is trying to tell you something. And once you get your students started looking for those things, they start making all sorts of connections for themselves that can really elevate their understanding of the content, which of course is the goal. And so I just listed a few things that can just be used, adapted, and implemented in the classroom. All right, was that fast enough?
That was great. Awesome. I love all the resources, and again, you all can access the slides and link to them if you can't capture those quickly as we go through. And so last but not least, Mick is going to share a little bit of his passion for comics.
Sweet. And Jewel, if you give me the screen share again, I'm going to bring us back to the website. So let's see, it should work. Hopefully you all can see that okay. So I shared with you before the March graphic novel. I kind of was thinking about it as an amazing opportunity because the history of comics really has covered all kinds of different genres. We mentioned some of them before, including things relating to science and to literature and all kinds of things. But if you think really like about traditional comic books, most people's brains go to superheroes, right? Superheroes or funny animals or something that's funny, but superheroes have become kind of like the dominant image or icon within the comics genre. And when you go to ComicCon, there's people dressing up, or there's people that are famous for playing them on TV or in the movies. But the point of it is that if you really boil it all down, comics really lend themselves to telling heroic tales. It's all about heroism. In my main gig with San Diego Unified, I'm doing a lot of work around bullying intervention. And I've told my students many times actually that bullying intervention is like any kind of intervention where you're doing something that requires risk, that requires a certain degree of knowledge that you're going to do something that could cost you, whether it costs you your job or your friendship or your freedom, or frankly, your two front teeth. Those are sort of like some of the ongoing concerns of when somebody intervenes in something that that involves the harming another person. So I think that really translates nicely though into comics, because if you think about it, there are so many heroic tales and stories that could be told that are about true people, like people that stepped up, ordinary, normal people that have their own sort of Bruce Wayne or Clark Kent personality, but then something extraordinary happens with them and they're able to tell their tale in a way that is superhuman. I think John Lewis is kind of like that. And John Lewis was, if anybody, he really told a story about something that was accessible, not just through the format, but by literally stating throughout the comic just how much this kind of work was that he did in the civil rights era, that was something that normal people did. I want to point out one area of the March archives that I created, and it's here. If you scroll down to the bottom of the March archives, it says the Who's Who from the March trilogy. And if you click on it, it'll take you to, let's see, should be this. It'll take you to some of these different characters. Some of them are still alive, like Jim Lawson, who was one of the people that trained John Lewis in the in kind of like the mentality and the competencies of nonviolence. Bob Moses is still alive, and all of these amazing people like Amelia Boynton and Malcolm X and Hosea Williams, Lyndon B. Johnson, Reverend Reese, like all of these people are showcased in the March trilogy. And Nate Powell and Andrew Aiden really went to great lengths to try to show who these people are, instead of just being kind of random figures. John Lewis goes to great lengths to try to underscore the contributions of these amazing figures in history. Another thing I want to point out about the March archives is that I try to create a pathway for all educators to be able to use this with their class. So I mentioned earlier, we want you to read the book. We want you to have a discussion about the book. We want you to watch a video that's related to the characters, whether that is the main characters in the story. In this case, it's John Lewis, who's actually telling the story. Or it could be that the author is telling a story about somebody who's no longer with us. And a good example of that would be Dietrich Bonhoeffer through the Faithful Spy archives. And Joanna did a nice job of helping me build a similar archives with the Faithful Spy archives. So I really want to say thank you for her involvement in that. But what we're trying to do here is to make it so that you show the video to your students so they could see and hear from this creator. And then finally, there's a segment in here where we want to have students be able to interact through Google Classroom, where the creator or the person that's the main character in the story reaches out to your students and literally says, here's what happened to me, what would you do? And really what that is about asking students to really think about their agency and stepping up in times that are about having courage, and in times of duress, in times of stress, and being able to have the moral fortitude to be able to rise to the occasion, much like the heroes that they read in their story. So I'm going to give you one example, and you can kind of get a sense of what I was trying to build here. This is the March. This is called the Google Classroom, and it's the March Google Classroom that I've created. If you dig into it slightly, you can scroll down to various pieces of it. But in this particular one, this is a video of John Lewis who's like turning to you, the reader, if you can imagine your class looking at
that
him.
would be risks.
He's turning to you and asking your students a question, in which case your students can respond in Google Classroom to him, and they can respond to each other. So here he is asking
in the work, a changing thing that were unjust and cruel. What kind of courageous thing can you commit to that bring kindness and affirmation to people in our schools and communities?
So I've done that for that one. And as Dizzy was talking, I also wanted to reference that we've created a Google, they called us Enemy Archives. And if you were to email me, I can give you the pieces to that. And here's one with George Takei, and he's asking a question. So I'm not going to go into the whole thing, but he basically turns to your students and asks a question.
3, 2. They Called Us Enemy explores the question of what makes a person American.
So he goes into that further and then prompts your students with a question where your students can actually respond back. All right, finally, before I get out of here, I know we're running super short on time. I want to point out that there's multiple resources for the March archives. And Jewel, if you'll put us back, I can quickly just reference the different types of links that we've put into the slide deck.
All right, and we have about 2 minutes for the total finale here. So let's see, it doesn't like it when I switch back and forth. So let me get you here. So I think you are asking about these.
Yeah, and so there is the link. So if any educators are interested, they can go to the bit.ly/March archives, and that will take them to the March archives that I mentioned earlier. And again, I'm mentioning it here. I've provided some curricular references, including some text talks that you can lead with your students. And down below, you can see the They Called Us Enemy archives link down at the bottom.
Perfect. Thank you so much for sharing and for creating so many of these pieces. So as we kind of come to a close here, I just wanted to make sure that you had access to the bookmark that I mentioned earlier as some additional resources. And when we do have spots open up in our book club, there's a little form that you can fill out if you're interested in joining us. And finally, that is it for us today. I wanted to make sure you also have the slides, this short link from bit.ly/CCED 2021, the ComicCon Educator Series. We are so excited to have been here today and share our information, our passion, and our learning with you. And so please feel free to keep in touch and reach out. You can always email me at jewel.clark@sdcoe.net or go to the website here, and I'll be able to put you in touch with anyone else on the panel. Thank you so much for joining us today, and keep on keeping on with all the great work, you super teacher, you.